However, Hamas leader Sinwar, as the saying goes, jumped the gun too early. According to documents captured by the Israelis during the war, he believed Israel was weak and simply didn't want to wait. He therefore initiated the October 7th attack, fairly certain that this would compel the other members of the alliance against Israel to join him. But the Iranians and their proxies held back. They didn't feel ready yet. Now, on October 11th, 2023, an opportunity arose to strike Hezbollah hard. Israel faced a critical decision regarding its war priorities. It simply couldn't fight everyone at once. The decision was made to forego the immediate opportunity in the north and instead focus on destroying Hamas capabilities in Gaza. Once most of that objective was achieved, Israel turned its attention to Hezbollah, launching a swift and successful campaign in September 2024 that obliterated their forces. It became clear then that Israel intended to take on its enemies one by one, from the smallest, Hamas, to the head of the octopus, Iran itself. Following the catastrophe of October 7th, Israel regained its balance and initiated a counteroffensive. Gradually, over the past 20 months, this campaign has systematically dismantled Iran's entire program, with the exception of its nuclear component and missile program. In response to this, the Iranians accelerated their nuclear weapons development, as well as their surface-to-surface missile manufacturing. On the eve of the recent Israeli offensive, they had approximately 2,500 missiles in their arsenals. They also began constructing more sites to increase and disperse their manufacturing base, making it much harder to destroy. Israel's successful campaign has, we hope, thwarted these Iranian plans for a long time to come. It remains to be seen what the long-term deep consequences of this war will be and how it will ultimately reshape the Middle East. What is clear, however, is that the long-standing taboo against making Iran pay for its action has finally been broken. Iranian deterrence, which was premised on the fear of Iranian retaliation against American targets in the Gulf, Saudi oil installations, or the threat to close the Hormuz Straits, all of this proved to be unfounded. It was Iran that was deterred. When faced with a strong, determined force, the Iranians were forced to back down, left with very few options. If no agreement is signed that securely prevents Iran from continuing its nuclear program, Israel will have no choice but to continue pressuring Iran, whether through air power or covert operations, in order to ensure Iran does not attempt to rebuild its nuclear and missile capabilities. I will turn now to our first speaker, Mr. Ran Segev, formerly senior member of the Mossad. Ran, please, the floor is yours. Maybe you need to click on your camera. Okay, Ran, Ran is not there, so maybe Jonathan, can you fill his place? You are the next speaker, Jonathan Rynhold.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm going to talk about American policy. And I want to start by focusing on the main decision maker. And the main decision maker in American foreign policy in general is the president. If it's important to the president, then it's the president that decides. So let's look at Donald Trump. I think the main conundrum that we need to understand is the following. How can it be that on the one hand, Donald Trump was so supportive of Israel in his first term, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the Golan Heights as Israeli territory, and then supporting Israel by bombing the Fordow nuclear plant that Israel could not do itself, on the one hand. And on the other hand, this is the same president that left Israel to its own devices against the Houthis, that did not coordinate with Israel regarding the normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia, which took a different position without coordinating with Israel in Syria and with regard to Turkey's role in Syria. And more generally, sometimes the president says something nice about Israel's prime minister, and sometimes he says less nice things. So what's going on? Well, you could just point to the personality of the president, but it's much more than that. There are two things here that we need to focus on. One is the instinctive strategy that Donald Trump deploys when dealing with the world, what you might call his grand strategy. It's not written out in terms of clear propositions. It's instinctive, but it's there, and he calls it America First. So what is America First, and how does it help us explain what Donald Trump is up to and what we might see going forward? Well, America First is a term that has its roots in the 1930s in the Republican Party, among those who were isolationist on the one hand and belligerent on the other hand. What does that mean? These belligerent isolationists were willing to use massive force to defend American territory and American citizens, but they were not prepared to govern the world. They were not prepared to make commitments to the security of other countries, allies. They saw alliances as a burden, not as a boon. And that view of how to understand American foreign policy has been out of fashion since Pearl Harbor until Donald Trump. But what we see with Donald Trump is, on the one hand, a willingness to use massive force to defend Americans and America. So if you need to get past 20 Taliban soldiers in Afghanistan, then Donald Trump used America's largest conventional bomb, what's called the mother of all bombs, the Moab, without any problem at all. However, when Iran attacked the Saudi oil refinery in 2019 and cut Saudi's production capability by about a third, America did nothing. Previously, almost any other administration would have responded. So how does that help us to explain what's gone on here? Well, the difference is this. Donald Trump does not want to take responsibility for the balance of power in the Middle East, which every American president has done for the last 50 years. But what he does want to do is protect America and the American homeland from threats directly emanating from the Middle East. And the number one threat is a nuclear Iran with an intercontinental ballistic missile. That is a missile that can hit America. And there was a released intelligence report, which is unusually was released to the public in a month ago, which said that America estimates that within a decade, Iran will have ICBMs that can reach the United States. So that changes the equation for Donald Trump. It means that it's not only the people in the Middle East and Southern Europe that are in direct range of Iranian missiles, but potentially America too. And so when Israel and others in the administration present evidence that that Iran is weaponizing developing the weaponization of its nuclear program, that is turning the enrichment into something that can be delivered in a weapon, in a warhead, then that becomes a window not only for Israel, but a window for America to act. And I think it was reported that one of the arguments that Netanyahu made to Trump, and I think this was a smart argument, was, do you want to be the person on whose watch Iran goes nuclear? And I think that's potent because it both speaks to the threat to the United States, which the head of the CIA and the head of America's military command in the Middle East, Kurilla, agreed with. And it speaks to his narcissism. And let's face it, he is the most narcissistic president America's ever had, and there have been some narcissistic ones. And so the idea, once Israel got started, that Israel was very successful, and the idea that if he did not do this, he would be seen as a failure, played into his view of things. Now, it's the idea of preemption here, right? The idea of using force when the threat isn't there is also part of belligerent isolationism. Because in the wake of Pearl Harbor and in the wake of 9/11, preemption took on an important role in American strategy. You can't allow, according to the preemption strategy, you can't allow your enemies to get to the point, as America did with North Korea, where they have the weapon, and then you can't stop them with conventional power, as you might have done before. And President Bush had two elements to his doctrine. One was to democratize the Middle East, and the other was to hit them before they hit you. Donald Trump is not into democratization, but he is very much into hit them before they hit you. So what does this mean going forward? Well, I think it means a number of things. First of all, I think that we can say that the type of agreement that Donald Trump would agree to, at a minimum, will involve no enrichment on Iranian soil, because that's something he's put out there, and that clearly distinguishes any agreement he reaches with the Obama deal. Israel would like much more than that, to dismantle the whole program like Libya did. That's possible, but I would imagine less likely. But I think in the terms of the minimum Israel will need, I think that Trump can meet it. Whether Iran can is a different matter, and I'll leave that to other speakers. A bigger problem comes with Israel's requirement to constrain Iran's missile program, because as Eitan explained, the whole strategy of Iran is to be able to overwhelm Israel with conventional missiles and kill thousands and thousands of Israelis and make those Israelis who are able leave the country. So the missile threat in the long run remains a problem. And since those missiles don't need to reach America, it's an open question whether Donald Trump will see this as something that is important to deal with, which some of the people in his administration will, like Marco Rubio, or whether he'll just say, it's not really my problem, I'm just dealing with the nuclear issue. And then a further problem could arise, which is that when Israel seeks to militarily set back that missile program, that if it's not included in the deal, then an American administration may seek to constrain Israel so as not to endanger the nuclear part of the agreement. It may not work out like that, but what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that to think of Donald Trump's strategy in terms of protecting the American homeland and protecting American citizens, and anything beyond like that, like maintaining a pro-American balance of power in the Middle East or stability, is very much secondary. And that's a very big difference from his predecessors. Thank you.
I think it's my turn now to speak, Jonathan. And I would like to focus my words on the background to the Israeli decision to attack Iran right now. And while speaking about the decision which was taken now, I would like to focus on three elements in the decision-making process. One is the issue of capability. The second issue is the issue of opportunity, which was created lately. And the third element that I would like to focus on is the necessity. And I want to make some reference to the previous round of decision-making, which was taking place in 2011, 2012, in which the decision was not taken, and to see the difference between what was going on then in the first round of decision-making and what was going on now. And I will start with the capability. In 2011-12, the head of the army and intelligence community were against the attack in Iran. They felt that our capabilities were quite limited. We may have one or two sorties in Iran. The damage we will cause to Natanz will be substantial, but can be fixed quite quickly. And the price and the cost of the attack will be a full-scale war in which Hezbollah will be involved, and we will pay dearly for the attack in Iran. In this case, now, in 2025, all the heads of the army, chief of staff, the commander of the Air Force, the head of the Mossad, and the political echelon were in unanimity that we have the capability to cause a substantial, significant damage to the Iranian nuclear program, that we will have the capability to push this program a few years back and to cause such a damage that it will justify the taking of the risk of attacking Iran. And I think through at least three elements were involved in this sense of capability, which was relayed from the army, from the intelligence community to the decision maker, namely to the prime minister. First of all, we can, the army could enable us to have control over the skies in Iran, to have an air superiority, which will enable us to attack numerous times in Iran until the damage will be substantial. The other thing is the intelligence penetration. The capabilities of the intelligence community, especially of the military intelligence, with regard to Iranian nuclear and missile program were spectacular. We knew a lot, and we could pinpoint the main strategic targets with great accuracy. And I think the third component which emerged during the attack was the clandestine capabilities to operate inside Iran. The Mossad in the last few years was successful in embedding inside Iran what we call operational platforms, which could be used at the moment of decision making of the attack, and enhanced substantially the capability of Israel both to frustrate Iran response to the attack and to cause maximum damage to the Iranian, and to maximize the damage to the Iranian defense capabilities. So in terms of capability, if we look now at the situation compared to 2012, our capabilities were enormously greater, enormously higher, and there was a sense of confidence among the decision makers, both on the political level and the military level and intelligence level, that it is doable. We can really inflict substantial damage on the Iranian nuclear and missile program. The other thing that I would like to talk is about the opportunity. And the opportunity was emerged through the development of our Iron Sword War, and it is mainly the defeat of Hezbollah. Hezbollah capabilities were built by the Iranians, as Eitan mentioned beforehand, as part of the ring of fire surrounding Israel. And in any case that we were contemplating a war against Iran, we had to take into account that immediately Hezbollah and Hamas, but Hamas from our point of view was a weaker link in the chain of this ring of fire. Hezbollah was much more substantial, that Hezbollah will be involved in the war, and that the Israeli civilian population will suffer massive attacks from Lebanon, which will cause many casualties and a lot of damage. And also that the Israeli Air Force will have to divert its attention, its resources to attack both and suppress the missiles launching from Lebanon, and at the same time to tackle the fire or the launching missile from Iran, Syria, Iraq, and maybe even Yemen. The collapse of Hezbollah, the defeat of Hezbollah, and the collapse of the Assad regime completely changed the strategic landscape. We no longer had this kind of threat from Lebanon. We have a freedom of flight over Syria because immediately after the collapse of Assad regime, we destroyed all the defense, the air defense facilities in Syria. And actually, we opened, for the first time for many years, we have this spectacular opportunity to fly all over from Israel till the border of Iran without any resistance, without any threat to our airplanes. And at the same time, we can concentrate all our capabilities in the air against Iran while we don't have to worry about what's going on in Lebanon because Hezbollah was actually completely defeated. So this was from the military and strategic situation, a sea change compared to the situation before the war, which began in 2023. And another component of opportunity was, of course, the fact that the United States was about to join us in the military effort against Iran. In all the previous discussions we had about possible attack in Iran, what we expect the United States is to share the burden of defending Israel against Iranian retaliation, Iranian efforts. And we have many doubts that the United States, for example, under President Obama, will ever join the fight shoulder to shoulder with Israel. This has completely changed, as Jonathan just explained, when we realize that now there is an opportunity, a real opportunity, that we will not carry the burden of the war inside Iran alone, but we will have the enormous capabilities of the United States, and especially when you take into account the need to attack Fordo and to neutralize Fordo and to cause substantial damage to Fordo, we didn't possess the same capabilities the United States had. So in terms of the opportunity, both in the strategic sense, the defeat of Hezbollah, the collapse of the Assad regime, the fact that for the first time we can plan our war alongside with a superpower such as the United States, created a new field of opportunities that we never had before. And the last thing I want to talk about is the necessity or the constraint in terms of the time. When we discussed about possibility of attacks in 2012, our main concern was enrichment capabilities. We knew about Natanz, we knew that the Iranians are increasing the number of centrifuges, and the question was whether it was worth to dismantle Natanz and to delay the moment in which Iran will have enough enriched uranium. And there wasn't the same sense of urgency that was now in discussion following towards the attack in Iran. Because since the late 2024, there was a major change in Iran in its approach to the issue of weaponization. Iran has a weapon group operating in Iran until 2003, in a project called IMAD. Following the American invasion of Iraq and the exposure of this program, Iran decided that it will focus all its energies and capabilities on the issue of enrichment and attaining enough fissile material when they will decide to have this breakthrough to the bomb. And the weapon group was kept in semi-dormant situation. People were there, the experts were there, they were in various fields of research, but they didn't work as a group. In the last few months, we have more and more intelligence on activization of the weapon group, and that the Iranians were working very, very earnestly and seriously on the issue of weaponization. And this changed completely the timetable with regard to frustrating the Iranian weapon system. There is the Iranian nuclear program. There was never a doubt that Iran can have the capability to enrich uranium to the military level of over 90%. This was never a technical problem for Iran. The issue of weaponization, namely to have the capability to use the fissile material as a bomb, needs that you have to make a specific research on the process which transformed this fissile material into a bomb. And this means that you need to have the instrument that caused the chain reaction, which is actually the real threat in the nuclear weapon. And the Iranians were working very hard and making progress on the issue of neutron research, which is the element that caused the chain reaction. And for the first time, we understood in the last few months that the time factor became crucial. The longer we let the Iranians to make progress in their research, the greater the threat they will reach the level of weaponization. And the three elements, I think, the sense of capability, the sense of the opportunity, and the sense of urgency, all combined, drove the Israeli leadership, military and political, to make the decision to attack on June 13. I think that without the cooperation with the United States and the backing of President Trump, this decision would have been very difficult to take. And I think that the fact that for the first time we had no need to worry about Hezbollah and Syria helped us a lot in making the decision. But the sense of urgency was the last factor that caused us to take the decision to attack on June 13. This concludes my remarks on the issue of decision making. My sense, I must say, is that the main goal of this attack was achieved. I read all the information, and I think it will take a few days to really analyze what was the real effect of the attack. But I think Fordow, Natanz, Isfahan were completely dismantled. Even Fordow had a substantial damage. Iran will be able to resume the enrichment of uranium. This is something they will be able to do because they know how to produce centrifuges and they have the technology. The weapon group and all the other elements that constitute the chain that build a bomb were severely damaged. And the most important link in this issue is the elimination of at least 20 major figures in the weaponization program of Iran. 20 scientists who were the key scientists to develop this program. And without the attack on 13 in June, we have no capability, no possibility to take them all together. The Mossad can take 1 or 2 in clandestine operation. 20 is, even for the Mossad to operate in Tehran, is a goal that cannot be achieved. And without the attack, we wouldn't have this kind of achievement. So I feel a sense of confidence that this decision was justified. And by and large, we thought that the price would have been much higher. Every casualty is a terrible price, but in terms of human life and damage, we suffered a lot of damage. We suffered casualties, but we thought that it might have been much higher. So thank you, and I pass the floor to the next speaker.
All right, good evening, everyone. I think I'm up. My name is David Levi, and I am a senior research fellow at BESA. I also spent 20 years in the American military. I was a senior officer in the United States Navy, and I served as the naval attaché in Tunis, Tunisia, and the director for security cooperation for Fifth Fleet in Bahrain. And I was in both Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom. Okay, so let me jump right into it. So what I want to talk about this evening is the U.S. capabilities in the region, which was a few days ago a little bit more interesting when we were thinking if a strike was going to happen or not. But now that we're past that and we're in this fragile ceasefire, I'll talk about the laydown and the forces in the region and how the U.S. is set up. But I also want to focus specifically on this scenario with the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran threatened it. It's still on the table just in case the ceasefire falls apart. And I want to talk a little bit about the implications of this, what the U.S. and allied response would probably be, and how quickly we could recover from this act. Okay, so let me go ahead and bring up slides. Okay, so let's jump right into it. First, let's talk about the U.S. posture in the region. If you look at the slide, on the left, this is, you've probably all seen this before. This is the U.S. military bases in the region. There are 13 shared air bases. There are 4 U.S. bases, including naval bases. And then if I can draw your attention to the right side of the slide on the bottom, you'll see Diego Garcia, which is an island in the Indian Ocean that's owned by the Brits, at least for now, with a very significant U.S. base. And let me jump right into the naval assets. So heading into the strike, this is the force posture we were looking at. The USS Nimitz carrier strike group and Carl Vinson carrier strike groups are both in the area. Each one carries an air wing of about 60 to 70 aircraft, most of which are combat aircraft, electronic warfare aircraft, or early warning radar aircraft. To put that in perspective, each air wing is about the size of 1/5 of the combat air power of the IAF, the Israeli Air Force. So 3 carriers is 3/5 of what Israel can put in the sky. In addition to the other U.S. Air Force assets that are in the region, in Diego Garcia, and also in American bases in Turkey and throughout the region. In addition to the air wing, the carrier strike groups have 9 to 10 escorts. These are all Aegis-capable cruisers and destroyers. That means that they have Tomahawk land attack missiles, which we just saw on the strike, although those came out of a submarine. I'll talk about that in a second. They also carry missile and air defense, specifically the SM-3, which is a weapon system that helps protect us from ballistic missiles, including these high-speed ballistic missiles that Iran just used. For aircraft, F-16s, F-22s, F-35s, these are the U.S. Bread and butter strike capable fighters. There's also refueling assets in the region, so strikes can be sustained and ongoing. There are B-52s already in Diego Garcia. We all know that the B-2s were brought over from the United States, did their strike and went home all in about 37 hours. So you don't necessarily have to have assets in the region for them to participate within short notice in events in the region. USS Georgia is a Ohio-class guided missile submarine. What that means is it used to carry nuclear, Trident missiles that were used in what would be a nuclear attack. Those were replaced with Tomahawks, which are land attack cruise missiles. In the recent attack, at least 30 of those were used coming from Georgia. She can probably carry about 150, so she still has a pretty large repertoire left, and she's still in the region. And then, if I could draw your attention to the lower left of the slide, that's Task Force 56, and this is the Mine Countermeasure Task Force. So the reason all these other assets are important in regards to a Strait of Hormuz scenario is you will have to have air dominance and maritime dominance in order to sweep and hunt mines in the strait. Because without that, all your assets in the strait will get destroyed. So you need to have the air wings and the ships in order to make sure that the environment's safe for the mine hunters to do their mission. So let me dive into that. So what if Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz? Okay, first, what are the economic impacts? A lot of countries get the oil from the Strait of Hormuz. Most of them are in Asia, India, China, South Korea, Japan. The number one consumer of crude oil is China, that comes out of the Strait of Hormuz. China also takes a significant amount of natural gas. Not all that comes from Iran. A lot of the natural gas comes from the Gulf countries, but it still has to go through the strait. So if the strait's been mined or closed, you wouldn't be able to get it out. China purchases around 90% of Iran's total oil exports. This is because of sanctions, so nobody else is buying it, really. A few countries are, but very few. And because China continues to be a purchaser, Iran sells it at a discount. A lot of this has to go through gray markets. A lot of these oil tankers have to go to third-party countries first, like Oman, to sort of whitewash the oil from Iranian to Omani, and then China can bring it out. Okay. So if China is the number one customer of Iranian oil, as well as the number one customer of oil that comes out of the Gulf, we can now see that closing the Strait of Hormuz has unintended consequences for what Iran is trying to achieve. So if Iran closes the strait, for the world, we're going to see a surge in oil prices, which will be a shock to the global economy. The liquefied natural gas market will also get hit because a lot of LNG comes out of the Gulf. Shipping insurances will skyrocket. Countries will have to use their strategic reserves until the strait is cleared and oil can flow again. And of course, it could all lead to a military escalation as a response to what Iran just did. For Iran, it doesn't make a lot of sense. They've been threatening to do this for years. They did do it once in the 1980s. I'll mention that in a minute. Their reason for doing such a move would have made more sense maybe 25 years ago. Doing it today is really self-sabotage. Iran would suffer more severe sanctions than they already have. It would anger their biggest customer, China. it would probably lead to some domestic instability, and which would in turn lead to a rise of regime destabilization. Because of the new sanction, because oil would now cost more, it would also be more expensive for Iranians. It would lead to international isolation, which really means Europe would be inclined to isolate Iran even further. But more interestingly is that the Gulf countries would be furious at Iran because they can't get their oil out of the Gulf. So their regional partners, or not partners, the Gulf countries, which have a usually more moderate approach, at least publicly, towards Iran, would have reason now to be angered and less moderate towards Iran. And all this would lead to a naval confrontation. Iran tried something like this in 1988 when it was fighting Iraq and attacked oil tankers in the Persian Gulf. This led to the United States executing Operation Praying Mantis, which destroyed a third to a half of Iran's navy and also attacked oil platforms, Iranian-owned oil platforms. Okay. So, clearing the slate is actually mine hunting, not mine sweeping, because mine hunting is for a very narrow area where you really need to make sure the mines are gone, because one mine would destroy a tanker and for a time period would block the strait. So you really need to clear a passage in the strait as opposed to sweeping a very large area, which is a different set of techniques. Luckily, we already have a standing task force to do this. It's located in Bahrain, Task Force 5-6, and it has Avenger-class minesweepers ready to go, 4 of them. It has usually one littoral combat ship, which has an augmented minesweeping capability, as well as underwater unmanned underwater vehicles, unmanned surface vehicles that help sweep, helicopters that do mine hunting. And then finally, once the mines have been determined where they are, you can send down EOD divers, frogmen, explosive ordnance disposal divers, and the marine mammal system, which I'll talk about in a minute. But that means using dolphins to help you hunt the mines. Okay. Okay, how quickly could the strait be cleared once it's been mined? Within 48 hours, you start doing the detection for the mines and you sortie the countermeasure task force. Within the next 2 to 7 days, you're creating safe lanes that you're sure there's no mines. And then you can escort ships through those safe lanes. And then for the next 1 to 4 weeks, you're systematically clearing the rest of the area. You have to map it all underwater. You have to ID everything that's there, sitting underwater. It could be a piece of a wreckage, it could be garbage, it could be a mine. Once you've ID'd everything, you send down divers, you send the dolphins down, you figure out what every single thing is, and any one of those things that's a mine, it gets blown up, gets destroyed. The dolphins don't get hurt. The dolphins just mark the things, and the EOD guys, the divers, do the demolitions. That can take 4 weeks, maybe more. Probably in the case of the Strait of Hormuz, 1 to 4 weeks. It gets cleared. We're back to operation as usual. But during the time period that the strait's closed, it's not like no oil gets out, because there are pipelines. There's the Saudi East-West pipeline, which ends in Yanbo, which is a port in which you can take 5 million barrels a day. Similarly, Abu Dhabi has a pipeline that gets you to Fujairah, which is on the south side of the Strait of Hormuz. You get another 1.5 million barrels a day. There's the Iraq-Turkey pipeline. There's a number of other pipelines that were destroyed in the Iraq War that have yet to be repaired, but under the right circumstances, they probably could be repaired in a rush job, in an emergency. But bottom line is that you would put out only about 7 million barrels a day instead of the normal 20 million barrels a day, which means that countries have to dip into their strategic reserves until you get the strait open again. Okay, one other quick comment on the mine sweeping itself. Every 1 to 3 years, the United States Navy in Bahrain hosts an enormous exercise. I think it's the second largest maritime exercise, rivaled only by Rim of the Pacific exercise in the Pacific Ocean in Hawaii. IMX, International Maritime Exercise, takes 30 plus countries. They do a at-sea exercise, which is what? Minesweeping. So Iran for years has been watching the United States put together this 30 plus country coalition specifically to demonstrate its ability to sweep mines to reopen the Strait of Hormuz as fast as possible. And interestingly, since Israel joined CENTCOM a couple of years back, Israel has been invited to IMCMX, where it's been exercising with European and Arab nations in this exact capability, clearing the strait. Okay, one other interesting side. US CENTCOM is having a change of command. General Mike Gorilla will be leaving very soon. He's been a great supporter of Israel. He has done a fantastic and focused job. However, when the senior person is picked for a unified command, when the United States decides to pick an Air Force general or an Army general or a Navy admiral, it's usually signaling something. And we can see right now a transition from the general, which was a focus on ground operations, which really means, Iraq and Afghanistan and large, foots on the ground kind of operations, to an admiral. So right now, Vice Admiral Charles Brad Cooper, he was Fifth Fleet. He knows the area. He's now he's the deputy of CENTCOM. And right now he's going through Senate confirmation so that he can take over later this summer. What I think the White House is signaling is that it wants to focus now on maritime affairs in the region. That means concerns about the Strait of Hormuz, concerns about, the Houthis and the Bab el-Mandeb, as well as being able to bring maritime capabilities such as strike warfare and aircraft carriers as needed, but not a focus on boots on the ground anymore. A maritime focus for defense of the region and protection of critical slots, maritime sea lanes and lines of communication and choke points. Okay, that's it. That is my brief. Hope I got that into my 10 minutes, and I will turn the floor over to the next speaker.
Thank you, David. So what David said is a great segue for me. I'm Eilai Rettig. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Political Studies here at Bar-Ilan University, and also a senior researcher at the Begin Sadat Center. And I will talk to you about the oil market. And I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation. Hopefully, you're going to see it fully on your screen. Okay. So just to confirm, you're seeing it. Okay, great. Now, so as you can see by the title, why the oil market is not afraid of the Israel-Iran war, we have a bit of a puzzle here, where everything David said was true. If Iran blocks the Strait of Hormuz, 22 million barrels of oil per day can't get mostly to Asia, and yet the oil market didn't seem to mind that much. When you look at the prices of oil, it was very mute, the response to the whole 12-day war. During the start of the war, price of the oil barrel was $68. The peak price was $77. And then immediately when the war ended, or the last day of the war, when we saw Iran's mute response to the US attack, it crashed immediately to a lower point than it was before the war. And so from $68 to $77 sounds like a lot, but it is not. Keep in mind that it started from a very low point. At the beginning of the year, it was $80. So the oil market basically said, we're not afraid of what's going on right now in the war. Even under an extreme scenario, where, as David described well, the Straits of Hormuz would have been blocked, analysts, major banks, whether it's JP Morgan or Citibank or Goldman Sachs, all predicted it wouldn't be a big deal. Even Goldman Sachs, which is usually kind of the dramatic exaggerator of the bunch that keeps saying oil prices are going to go up to $300, even they said that in the case of the blockage of Hormuz, oil prices are going to go up to $130 and then immediately crash to $55 by the end of the fourth quarter of 2025, which is saying a lot. $130 sound like a lot, but if you would have asked 3 years ago, they would have said something like this, blocking the Straits of Hormuz, that would be $250, $300 per barrel, something like that happened. And again, this is a big puzzle because everything David said was true. This is the major choke point for 22 million barrels of oil per day, depending on how you measure. Some say 19, some say 21. And a major blow to the global oil market. So why didn't the market get excited over this war? And what does this tell us about the next year? So there are three main reasons why the oil market was not fazed by the war. The first is oversupply. The market is awash with oil. The second is alternative infrastructure that will come into play even when the straits are blocked. And the third is the role of China. So I'll go through them very quickly. The first issue is oversupply of the market. Keep in mind, there's a lot of mystique surrounding geopolitics and the price of oil and how much the Middle East affects the price of oil. But there are only two things that determine the price of oil in the world, and that's supply and demand. And so if the world is currently awash with oil, if there is a lot of supply and not enough demand, it doesn't really matter what happens in the Middle East. Oil prices are going to remain low. A great example of this, and David mentioned this, is the Iran-Iraq war. For 8 years, two major oil exporters bombed one another, bombed each other's oil tankers. Iran even tried to block the Straits of Hormuz, and yet throughout this time, oil prices continued to crash, right? Even with all of these threats, even when it actually came true, oil prices didn't respond. And the reason was, during the 80s, the world was awash with oil. A lot of new non-OPEC oil producers started going online, whether it was in Norway or the UK. The Soviet Union started flooding the market with oil in order to recoup its failing economy. And on the other hand, technology came in, and the West started running away from oil as a source for electricity generation. We ran towards nuclear right before Chernobyl. We ran towards coal plants. Cars became much more efficient, could run much more miles per gallon. And so supply was up, demand was down, and the oil prices didn't respond to the Iran-Iraq war. The same thing is happening right now. The current oil market is flooded with oil without a clear demand for oil, the oil coming out. A bunch of reasons for why it's overflooded. One is Russia, desperately trying to sell oil, cheap oil, to anyone willing to buy it. China and India are gobbling up Russian oil at a deep discount, taking away market share from the Gulf states, and Russia is only producing at record prices, trying to get to markets to fund their war in Ukraine. And the US is flooding the market, right? The US used to be the major importer of oil. Now it is a major exporter of oil, and it is providing oil and liquefied natural gas to Europe to compensate for the lack of Russian oil, which they don't want to buy. Add to this OPEC Plus that said that they are not going to cut production, they're only going to increase production, even though the EIA is telling them don't do it because oil prices will crash. And so there's a lot of supply currently in the market. On the other hand, technology is coming in. China, who's the biggest importer of oil, is rushing towards electric vehicles. 1 of every 2 vehicles currently sold in China is an electric vehicle. Renewable energies are coming online. And so whether there's a ceasefire or not, the world is currently swimming in oil. And the EIA, the Energy Information Administration, expects that oil prices are going to be low. The EIA is saying by until 2030, oil prices are going to get low. That doesn't mean that they're true. They usually don't predict it correctly. And oil prices usually go bust and boom, right? They go down and then they go up. But in terms of timing, it was ideal. In terms of when Israel decided to strike Iran, this was an ideal time in terms of the oil market, because the oil market was not afraid of like it was 3 or even 2 years ago. That's the oversupply. The second issue is alternative infrastructure. David mentioned this. Even in the case that the Straits of Hormuz would have been blocked, the assumption in the market was that it could be compensated not fully, but almost fully. One of them was the assumption that the United States, not just an assumption, the US said that they're going to release their strategic petroleum reserves to the global market. They have 400 million barrels there currently, 402 million barrels, and to make sure that the prices don't go up too much in case of a blockage. But other than that, the UAE and Saudi Arabia said, don't worry, we can compensate for any oil missing for China, for example, if the Straits of Hormuz get blocked. But then you wonder, wait, but if the Straits of Hormuz get blocked, then they can't get their oil to the market. And David mentioned this. This is not entirely true. At least for Saudi Arabia and the UAE, they can bypass the Straits of Hormuz. They have invested heavily in infrastructure to bypass the Straits of Hormuz because Iran has been threatening to block the Straits since the 1980s. Saudi Arabia has the east-west oil pipeline that goes to the Yanbu terminal. David mentioned its capacity is 5 million barrels per day. It increased that capacity. So after Iran attacked it in 2020, the Abqaiq refineries, they increased the capacity, they upgraded the pipeline. Now it can move 7 million barrels of oil per day. The entire export of Saudi Arabia is 7.5 million barrels. So 7 million barrels, that's almost all of it. Now, it doesn't solve everything because that oil needs to go east. So once it gets to Yanbu, it needs to go down to the east, right, through the Houthis. But still, it's not perfect, but it's a good release. The UAE also has a pipeline that goes to Fujairah that bypasses the Straits of Hormuz, and that's good for about half of its oil exports. The countries that really are stuck if the Straits of Hormuz get blocked is, first of all, Iran, but also Iraq, Kuwait, and Qatar. They do not have alternative infrastructure other than the Straits of Hormuz. And so what this event will probably do is going to push them to try to create land infrastructure similar to Saudi Arabia to bypass completely the Straits of Hormuz. Iraq wants for decades, Iraq wants a pipeline all the way to Jordan, to Aqaba. And now that Assad is gone, then it can have the pipeline go through directly to the East Mediterranean through Syria. And Qatar is also contemplating this idea of going to Turkey through the post-Assad Syria. Any pipeline like this would take a decade to build, but events like this are the things that push these mega projects forward. The third and last thing is the role of China. The assumption that China will pressure Iran not to block the Straits of Hormuz because China will be the main casualty of a blockage of the Straits of Hormuz, and China is the main ally of Iran, so it doesn't really make sense for Iran to do this kind of thing, right? So 90% of Iran's oil goes to China, 45% of the general oil that goes to the Straits of Hormuz goes directly to China. The Iranian oil goes, it's sold at a discount to China, $3.5 less than the market value of the barrel. But there's also a lot of commissions going on because they need to have shadow fleets that turn off their AIS, their GPSs. They need to go through Oman and Malaysia in order to smuggle the Iranian oil so that China can claim that it's not actually Iranian oil, but it is. And private teapot refineries in China are buying up the cheap Iranian oil. So if Iran blocks the Straits of Hormuz, Saudi Arabia and the UAE are going to sweep in, even the US is going to sweep in and sell the oil to China that Iran is not going to sell. And for China, Iran will prove itself to be an unreliable supplier that is causing trouble to China. So looking forward and what we can learn from this, if I'm China, I'm going to rely less on oil and LNG from the Middle East. It's unstable. China doesn't have the power it maybe thought it would have in the region to stabilize it. And so China will look directly to Russia to get more oil and LNG. One project is the Power of Siberia 2. There's already a pipeline, a gas pipeline going from Russia to China, Power of Siberia 1. Power of Siberia 2 will increase substantially the amount of gas through pipeline that will go to China. And another option is, of course, to increase LNG and oil through the northern route. Climate change, glacier melting is helping Russia use this route to get to China because there's less months where the sea is frozen and the ships can get through. And the last thing will be infrastructure. If the Straits of Hormuz, if the recent war reminded everybody how unstable the Straits of Hormuz can become, then this idea of building a land corridor all the way to the East Mediterranean or the Red Sea to bypass all of this trouble is once again getting its groove back, right? One of these options is the IMEC corridor. But again, keep in mind, it doesn't have to go through Israel, this corridor. It can go through Egypt, it can go up through Syria, it can go all the way up to Turkey. It doesn't necessarily have to go through Israel. And so if Israel doesn't end the war, doesn't normalize relations with Saudi Arabia, and doesn't improve relations with Jordan, then this corridor will, this potential corridor will bypass it. So thank you very much.
So good evening. Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Dagan Amos. I'm a researcher at Besa Center and lecturer at the Political Science Department. So my lecture is a little bit different, but I'm sure it's going to be very strange at first why we are talking about that. But it's very important. We are going to talk about Iran, India, Pakistan, Israel relationship. Wait. Oh. Okay. So, as I said, we're going to talk about and to examine our India foreign and security policy amid Israel-Iran war. Specifically, we explored the strategic triangle involving India, Iran, Pakistan, and Israel. My key argument will be this crisis did not weaken India. It created an opportunity to deepen ties, especially with Israel. But my lecture is about India, but I think also about Japan and South Korea and Philippines, that they are very important actors in the Indo-Pacific. In this arena, it's important for them also, as Eilai mentioned before and David mentioned before him. So before we'll do the micro aspect, we need to see what is the relationship. So between India and Iran, for India, Iran is the access for Central Asia. Chabahar port is the way for India to get through to the Central of Asia. If you imagine the map, you will see that Pakistan is a block India to this access. But there is challenges. Iran have nuclear ambitions, and historically, they have a lot of criticism about Kashmir issue between India and Pakistan. With Israel, India and Israel have defense tech, intelligence, IMEC, defense, agriculture, water, but we have challenges like tensions with Iran. With Pakistan, it goes without saying, but it's most important to speak about it, the regional adversary, the counter-terrorism focus, and we're going to speak about the Sindoor operation. And of course, again, there is a challenge, the Kashmir issue, but also the China ties, the cross borders, the nuclear risk. So I don't need to focus on that, you know, all the strikes that we've been through all this last 2 weeks. But it's very special to see the India response, that India calls for restraint and de-escalation. India did not participate in the CCO agreement that say that Israel doing a terrible thing and a poor narrative for Iran. To avoid the direct criticism of either side, India evacuate some of Indian nationalists from Israel, but also from Iran. It's important to say that. And they are doing that every time there is a conflict in the area, like in Ukraine issue. Between India and Pakistan, so last month, it was a Operation Sindoor that came after that in April 2025, India suffered from a terror attack in Pangalam. India responded with Operation Sindoor, a cross-border operation, and Pakistan administered Kashmir. Israel publicly support India's right to self-defense, one of the few countries to do so. This reinforced the strategic axis between India and Israel while signaling the deterrence through Pakistan. Pakistan, from their aspect, Pakistan expressed rhetorical support for Iran, a right to self-defense under Article 51 of the UN Charter, but this support was cautions and clarify Pakistan walks decline line. It doesn't want alliance Saudi Arabia and UAE or US. It shares 900 kilometers border with Iran, especially across Baluchistan. There is a lot of problem over there between Iran and Pakistan. And it experienced direct cross-border fire with Iran in early 2024 over Jaish al-Adal. So for Pakistan, it's very complex time to do pro things for Iran, because, as I said, there is a complex situation between Iran and Pakistan. But Pakistan is anti-India and anti-Israel. So for Pakistan, it was much easier to say the pro-Iran attitude, so she can not will risk with another escalation with Iran. India, a geographic interest. So as Eilai said, and I'm not going to say that again about the IMEC and important, but Chabahar port and IMEC, I2U2 are in structures that India must and want to do with the Middle East. She wants to improve the presence in the Middle East. India imports most of the oil from the Gulf. Iran's threat to close to Strait of Hormuz triggered concern in New Delhi. India respond not with force, but with infrastructure, as I mentioned before, Chabahar, IMEC, I2U2, etc. So for India, she's trying to balance between the Iran and Israel. But as we can see, Israel for India is not longer just a defense partner. It is now a part of India logistic and infrastructure vision. IMEC links to India and Europe via Gulf and Israel. But as Eilai said before, IMEC can do through Syria, through Greece. If Israel won't wake up, IMEC won't be here. India leveraged this coordinator to rend a density path to bypass checkpoints like Hormuz. And this shift is structural and not temporarily. India today finds itself as an unusual, almost paradoxical position. One end, it is deeply invested in Chabahar port in Iran, a project symbolizes its partnership with Tehran and to get away to Central Asia. On the other way, it's promoting India Middle East coordinator. This duality reflects India's flexible strategy, but it also shows the geopolitical swing-up point that India must walk. In fact, this crisis is possibly a future normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia could increase space for India in the Middle East. India can emerge not just a neutral power, but as a connectivity leader that bridges infrastructure, diplomacy, and trade between rivals bloc. What you can see that the Israel-Iran war of June 2025 placed India's diplomacy under intense pressure. Yet, rather than a failure, India used the crisis as an opportunity to protect its citizens, safeguard its interests, and quickly expand its struggle wall. India is no longer a passive observer in regional affairs. It's shaping the emerging order through balanced, resist, and strategic foresight. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shay Shabtai. I'm Colonel Reserved, was the head of the long-term strategic planning department of the IDF, and I'm a strategic planner, an expert, and a cyber strategist. I will talk about the day after. The headline of my lecture is 1967 moment in the Middle East. And the question is why? Why can we compare what happened right now to 1967? And I think there are four main responses for that. One is the Israeli decisive military victory that changes regional strategic posture. And it was described by Ran, for example, and Eitan. Old paradigms. In 1967, it was Nasserism. Now it's the resistance are in question. The third is that the regional stand of the US strengthens and other forces. In 1967, it was the Soviet Union, and now it's Russia and China are of less importance. And the fourth reason is that Israel has strategic assets in its disposal and have to decide how to use it. Unfortunately, after 1967, this thinking was not done so much, but today we can think about our strategic assets in the region, and use them in our future policy. Okay, what can we learn about the post-1967 war? There were 5 reactions by the Arab world to 1967. Few liberal intellectuals started talking about peace. The most prominent and known of them is Mohammed Said Ahmed, who after the 73 war wrote this famous Gun Fall Silent book, and liberal intellectuals started talking about peace with Israel, but there were very few. The second one was the Arab leaders with the no, no, no approach of Khartoum summit. This was the lowest common denominator led by the radical leaders of the Arab world that period. And then there was Anwar Sadat, who is, I consider, the most prominent and innovative Arab leader in the 20th century, who I identified the paradigmatic shift to US and Israel and thought about a limited war to end all wars, and that's what he has done in 73. Radical Islam flourished after 67 as socialism, Nasserism, Baathism decayed as a result of the war. And 1967 is really the beginning of the wave of jihadi terrorism that we experience up until now. And the Palestinian movement have risen as Arab countries struggled with Israel became less popular, the radical PLO took over. And the issue is, so the question for us thinking about the day after of this war is how to create more Sadats and not Arafats and Ben Ladens. How to create the next Begin Sadat Besa moment. And in order to do that, we need a new way of thinking about the regional geostrategy and adapt new ideas. So what old paradigms that didn't really work in the last 50 years, and we should really rethink them. First of all, peace accords and formal normalizations. They were more relevant for the first circle enemies of Israel, like Egypt and afterwards Jordan, and it failed with Syria. Maybe it will succeed today in the next future. But the concept of peace accords is less relevant for the more broader regional dynamic. And in that sense, we need to speak more about normal relations, establishing normal relations, and real peace accords are less important. The second paradigm that is problematic is the two-state solution, which started with the UN Security Council Resolution 242 after 1967. And Gaza is the last and absolute proof that the resolution of the Palestinian issue should be based. It will be hard to base it on the old European-based sovereignty principles. And we have to rethink, and I will talk about it in a moment, about new ideas, and not only with the Palestinian issue. The fourth paradigm is the axis. Radical axis, Muslim Brotherhood axis, conservative, moderate axis. The area's politics is much more flexible than that. It's much more hybrid. When we look at Qatar and Saudi Arabia, there is a game between what we call axis. So axis paradigm really does not help us to understand and solve problems in this region. The fifth one is, of course, democracy. The most advanced, stable, and innovative states in the region are not democracies. So solution, the future of the Middle East doesn't seem to correlate to the democratic idea. And the last one is the street sentiment, which we talk about so much. The street sentiment is widely based on fear and hate and cannot be the base for progress. So what new ideas can be the base for the next Begin-Sadat Bessa moment of the Middle East? I'm thinking about, I've put 7. The first one are partnership for security. Less alliances and official coalitions like the Americans like, and more pragmatic and practical security cooperations. Let's build it from down up and low and bottom up, and not the other way. A net of infrastructure, Eilai talked about it. IMEC is an example. Middle East countries should be interconnected with energy, transportation, and communication networks. These long-term projects must start now, and they will be the base for coexistence in the region. The third idea is a civilian and economic vision. We have to approach the civil sectors, the business sector, for example, and do not work through the political layers of the region and the issues. The fourth one is that accountability will not be achieved by elections. Democracy is not a binding condition for a thriving pragmatic region. The fifth one is the hybrid state sovereignty. Separate the different layers of statehood and create new models. Separate between people, territory, government, and recognition. Think about new ideas of sovereignty. And this is relevant not only for the Palestinians, but also for the Kurds, the Druze, and the Christians. The sixth idea is marginalization of radicals, not the idea of de-radicalization, but marginalization, envelope and isolate them, and let them come to their senses. It is relevant, for example, for Gaza. It is relevant for Syria. It is relevant for Hezbollah and Lebanon and other countries too. And the seventh and last I've written about already in BESA perspective is what I call semi-self-governance. External intervention will be done only when necessary. And I think in a way, the intervention of the Americans in Yemen and the Iran war are already an example of how this idea has been implemented. You only intervene in Middle East countries when there is a significant problem of proliferation or terror or human rights, and you leave them to build themselves as much as you can. The bottom line is for us that in these kinds of new paradigms, there is a new role for Israel. This new role combines being vigilant about our security, but very smart in our partnerships. Thank you.
Okay, I think maybe we have a few minutes, like between 5 or 10 minutes, to answer some questions from the audience. So if our listeners the viewers can send us questions through the chat, I will be able to read them and direct them to the right researcher or the right expert. There is one question about clarifying the role of future intentions of Erdogan in Turkey. I'm not sure who wants to take this question. Maybe Ran. Ran, could you speak about Erdogan? Say a few things about his intentions.
Ran, you are muted.
Ran, you're muted. You have to open your microphone.
Okay.
Okay, now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Okay. I think that this war, on the one hand, is quite a negative development for Turkey because it demonstrated Israel's major role in shaping the future of the Middle East. And it also demonstrated the closeness of strategic alliance between Israel and the United States. At the same time, the degradation of Iran position in this area, taking into account the competition between Iran and Turkey in the past in Syria, and the fact that the United States still view both Qatar and Turkey as key players in the Middle East, means that in the future structure of the Middle East, Iran might be marginalized or at least isolated to a very large extent. And the key players in the Middle East will be 2 or 3 regional powers. And the 3 regional powers that I can think of shaping the future of the Middle East will be Turkey on the one hand, as representing the more Sunni conservative camp, allying itself with Qatar and competing for influence in Syria, with Saudi Arabia leading the more pragmatic camp in the Arab world, and Israel, of course, as a player with a regional influence. So I think the results of the war, on the one hand, demonstrated Israel's domineering part in the military field, but also kept the field open to the competition of three major regional players, which I just mentioned: Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. Okay?
Another question to you, Jonathan, but maybe I'll say a word about it. Jonathan, the question he's asking for speaker number 2, although I was the one who was speaking about the objectives of the war, because he's asking why wasn't regime change one of the objectives of this war? I'll just briefly answer that the regime change calls for a much wider operation for much longer time. The risks are very high. Probabilities are unknown. And this is definitely something that for sure the US doesn't want to get involved into because of the bad experiences of regime change in other countries. But I'll let you also say something about it, Jonathan.
I agree with Eitan. But I'll say one other thing, and that is that in order to get Iran to give in on the nuclear issue, America had to, or Trump had to hold something in reserve that he could use if they didn't do what he wanted. So he used regime change in that way. You know, maybe I will, maybe I won't, right? To threaten them that if they don't give in on the nuclear thing, then you know he's gonna take a shot at the regime itself. It probably wouldn't have worked because external forces alone can't achieve that, and you can see that in Afghanistan and in the intervention in Iraq. 20% of the people of Iran support the regime. They're very motivated either for ideological or financial and political power, and they have the guns. And to sort of take that on would require not only great bravery from a large number of Iranians, but it would probably also require a split in the regime, which would then render their ability to respond effectively much more difficult. And the final factor is there's no guarantee that what comes out of an attempt at regime change is better. Chaotic situation with hundreds of kilograms of uranium around, if indeed that is true, is not a good thing. And so I think on balance, while, you know, I think it's still a possibility, right? It's still a possibility. I think that it was a smart and sensible strategic decision not to make that a core objective.
Okay, thank you. Shay, there is a question about what are the odds the IAF gets its hands on strategic bomber like B-52? Make it a quick question because we a quick answer because we have other questions that calls for longer answers.
Yeah, we don't want the B-52s for 3 main reasons. One, it's an overstretch. It's an expensive to handle, and to the logistics. It's too big for the IDF and the IF. The second reason, we don't like boutique arrays. You know, you have one plane and then you want to operate it, and the door does not close. So you don't have the possibility, the operational possibility. And the last reason is that for our needs, we have the solutions.
Thank you. Yes, the door doesn't open, like in Elal. So, David, the return of naval assets to the Middle East improved the trust of Saudi Arabia in US after prior uncertainties about the US trustworthiness under the Trump administration. So basically, there is more trust from Saudi Arabia now that you have more assets in the region, the US assets?
Yeah, well, I think there's lots of things that the U.S. has done to reestablish a positive relationship with Saudi Arabia since the last administration. Trump visiting, business deals and investment, giving them permission to have a civilian nuclear program. I don't think you need to have maritime assets there all the time. What you need is have maritime assets there when there seems to be a threat. And the U.S. responded with air assets, maritime assets, and then, of course, the granddaddy move of them all, which is bombing Fordo, which is in Saudi Arabia's interest, not just Israel's interest. So I think Trump has done a lot to reestablish a positive relationship. We have a security cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia now, and I think this is all in preparation of expanding the Abraham Accords. Making Saudi Arabia feel comfortable with its relationship with the United States, particularly with security, as things have developed, such as the attack on Iran. All this is leading to some sort of future Abraham Accords agreement once we resolve the Gaza war, which is a different discussion.
Okay. Ron, there is a potent question here regarding the debates about the extent of the damage to the Iranian nuclear program. Do you think that if there is that a future confrontation between Israel and Iran is probable? Or is a negotiated diplomatic solution more likely? I know that Trump said it can be a diplomatic solution and it can be something else. He just said it a few hours ago. So I guess here you have the short answer.
I think the damage is substantial. And I think that Iran lost the capability to have a nuclear device in the coming few years, even though they might resume the enrichment of uranium. And as I said, they have the technology and probably they have enough uranium enriched to a low grade, 20%, left in Iran. Not everything was destroyed. You have to remember it. Even we have question marks with regard to the 400 kilograms enriched to 60%. So I think it will be a matter of negotiations, which will start next week between the United States and Iran. I have a question mark whether Iran will be ready to give up all its infrastructure in enrichment. As for the weapon group, they never admitted that they have it, and they're not going to present it as one of the cards that they are going to give up. But enrichment was something that was very, very important to them. Even the United States can come with all kinds of practical solutions. They can guarantee Iran that they will have the uranium that they need for their for Bushehr or other needs. But this will, according to my understanding of the Iranians, is something that almost tantamount to national humiliation, to give up all their nuclear capabilities. I want just to add one thing. I don't think that Trump thinks in terms of regime change in Iran. And from his perspective, if Iran gives enough concessions on the nuclear issue, maybe even on the ballistic missile, but certainly on the uranium program, he will be ready to come forward with a lot of concession with regard to the economic sanctions, because I think he wants to have a deal. And from his perspective, as he many times said it, he would like to see Iran prosperous economically. So if Iran will restrain its export of the revolution through terrorism, give up certain key components of its uranium program, I wouldn't completely exclude the possibility that the United States will be quite generous with the lifting of the economic sanction. but it is very far away down the road. And as Trump used to say, we'll see. We'll start negotiation. We'll see what happens.
David, there is a question regarding the land sea missiles that you didn't mention. So the argument is that they possess the greater threats. So what do you have to say to that?
Right. So I try to, for the sake of time, I try to roll that into the idea of having air and maritime dominance. But it's absolutely a problem. So they have all these coastal missiles. Some of them are fixed, like the Khader, so that's relatively easy to take out. Most of them are mobile, like their version, the Iranian version of the Charlie 802 and the Khader. You would have to have a combination of offense and defense to take care of this threat. So that means you have to have ISR to find them, which is going to be drones and other capabilities. You're going to have defense, such as aircraft to shoot them down, and Aegis capable and shore-based defense. And you're probably going to want to put special forces on the ground as well. And all of that would have to take place probably before you really want to put the minesweepers in the area, so that the minesweepers are safe. And then, of course, there's a certain amount of deterrence. If one of these missiles actually hits an American flagged vessel or an American warship, America would respond, significantly. So yeah, it's got to be addressed. It's an issue.
Okay, guys, I think we did answer most of the questions, and we are already past the official ending time. I would like to thank you all, and I would like to thank our listeners, and I'll just say stay safe, drive safely home from your offices, and we'll meet you all soon in our next webinar, I hope. See you. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.